Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll be starting in a minute or two. We're just going to let everyone come in. It's nice to see you all.
Hi.
Recording in progress.
Right.
Are you okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Everyone, one last more minute and then we'll be starting. Settle down. Okay, Madison, we're ready to go?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, great. So, welcome everyone. Chodesh Tov. It's nice to see you on our screens. My name is Pini Baumol, and together with me co-hosting tonight is Madison Margolin. It's a really big honor and pleasure to be here. Today we're going to be doing for the first time something that we've talked about for a while, but is kind of super exciting and very new for us. So we're going to be doing this hopefully every Rosh Chodesh, every Jewish new month. And what we're going to be doing today is Chavrusa, is a traditional Jewish learning session. We'll be doing an introduction for a few minutes, and then we'll be splitting up into pairs and going over a source sheet that we've prepared in a traditional style. Then coming back to this main room, we're going to be, me and Madison are going to be doing our Chavrusa for your pleasure, hopefully. We're going to be teaching each other different things. And then after that, we're going to be opening the floor for all of us to be learning together. I just want to say that this is super exciting for me. I want to thank you all for signing up and for coming. And for those of you who are watching the recording of this, obviously, you're missing out, but we love you as well. Just wanted to shout out about donations for this evening. Obviously, we're encouraging donations through either PayPal or Patreon, and we're going to be giving those donations over to a newly formed nonprofit here in Israel that we're part of, called ACPT, the Access Center for Psychedelic Therapy and Treatment. And this money is going to go for helping accessible therapy here in Israel. So I'm super excited about that. And just wanted to say on behalf of both Madison and I that this evening is here for us to share some of our perspectives from Jewish tradition and from psychedelic experiences. And we're definitely not representing any specific part of Judaism or any part of psychedelic scene world, whatever it may be, other than our own experiences and our own Torah knowledge that we've gathered and we would like to share here. Madison, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just thank you, Penny, for that introduction. And thank you everyone who's joining either here right now live or in the recording later. Just very excited to be here. And this started out as just Penny and I kind of, having a casual conversation that we came up with this idea, Penny put it out there, and here we are. And so I'm just really humbled by how many people have expressed interest in it. And, we'll see how it evolves over time, but yeah, just happy to be here. So, and Chodesh Tov, everyone.
I just, before we break out into breakout rooms and learn together the source sheet that we've prepared, I just want to say that today, besides being Rosh Chodesh, is also the first day of Ramadan. So Ramadan Kareem to anyone who's interested in that perspective as well. And also the birthday of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, one of the teachers that both me and Madison really enjoy studying and following in some ways. So I just thought to put that out there and say Ramadan Kareem, happy birthday Rabbi Nachman, and Chodesh Tov to all of us. I'm going to be sharing in the chat box the source sheet that I've emailed all of you, so you should all have it in your email anyways. And we're going to be breaking you up into breakout rooms for 13 minutes or so. And we're encouraging you to go over the sheet and to discuss a little bit with the partner that you'll be matched with. After that, we'll be coming back and we'll each be, me and Madison and I will both be sharing some of our perspectives on this amazing theme. So we'll see you back here in a couple of minutes. I'm going to be dividing you into groups. And if any of you need the source sheet available, just send me a chat message and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, anyone who's not in a room yet? I see surprised faces who should be disappearing. Oh, there we go. Okay. And Michael, I'm going to move you also. Okay.
It says Alicia was in the waiting room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
Hi.
Okay.
It's only
Welcome,
us.
welcome back, everyone.
Hey. Hey.
We have everyone here, Penny? No
Yeah.
more people. Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So I hope everybody had a good chavrusa in the breakout rooms. Oh, adding another person. Okay, so pretty much what's going to happen now is Penny and I are going to have our own chavrusa. So I'm going to present a little bit about, some text text sources that I put together around the month of Nissan and how I relate that to the psychedelic experience. And then Penny will do the same, and we'll have a chavrusa. And then at the end of that, we'll all come back together and, you know, have a kind of questions and engagement with the audience here. So I'm assuming everyone discussed this to an extent in their individual chavrusas, but just to lay the foundation of what is Nissan, right? So it's one of the 4 Jewish, and then we have Nissan, Tu B'Shvat, which is New Year for the trees, and then Elul, which I think has to do with the animals, if I'm not mistaken, with livestock. Okay, Penny's giving me a thumbs up, which means I'm not mistaken. And so pretty much when I think of Nissan, it feels like really like spring has sprung. I'm here in New York. It's like the first week where the weather has gone from 30 degrees every day to now 50 degrees. You really start to feel a freshness and kind of renewal in the air. So that's kind of the foundation of where I'm coming from when I was putting together my sources. And so when we say psychedelic chavrusa, the way I understand it and the way I understand psychedelic Judaism, generally speaking, is that I use Jewish framework to understand the psychedelic experience. And by the same token, I often see Jewish text through the experiences that I've already had with psychedelics. And I see a text and I say, wow, that's really trippy, or that sounds like they're describing a psychedelic experience. And I make sense of my own experiences with different substances through what Judaism says. So one of the first texts that got me inspired in putting together this whole textual display here is from Derech Hashem about prophecy. And so as it says here in part 3 regarding prophecy, and the thing is clear and perceived by him without any doubt. That's the person who's receiving the prophecy, in the same way that he would have no doubts about something physical that he perceives with his senses. Note that the essence of prophecy is the attainment of this cleaving and connection to God while he is still alive, which is certainly a great perfection. So what I understand this through the psychedelic experience is really through my experiences with substances, they put you in your body in a completely different way. And you're in touch with your intuition and your soul, your neshama, in a way that is out of the ordinary from your mundane, regular experience. And so, you know, there have been times where my heart has been beating in a certain way, or I'm super aware of what's going on in my gut and my instinctual kind of realm. And so knowing something in the body, quote unquote, sometimes is almost a truer test of knowing versus knowing something with the intellect. And so a lot of the psychedelic discourse today has to do with, you know, they talk about trauma lives in the body or moving emotions through the body. And I find that psychedelics especially wake me up to that emotional body beyond just like getting stuck in my head. So that's one thing, is somatic intuition, knowing something through the body. And that's what it's talking about here as regard to prophecy, is you have to, it says, knowing have no doubts about something physical that he perceives through the senses, right? If you see something with your own eyes, if you feel a sensation, you know, through touch, if you hear something, there's no question about it, right? It's not like going over something in your mind a million times and wondering what the truth. So I understand it that the body is sort of this kind of container for the soul. And the inverse is also true. So that when we feel in the body, we're actually in a state of truth and freedom from the klipa, from the shell of the ego. So pretty much with psychedelic experience, we can often come to a place of diminishment of the ego and being more in touch with the soul and less in touch with, you know, what our minds want us to think, or kind of confusing us about how we feel. And so we're able to sort of shed the ego and shed the, I would say, like the shell of the ego upon our experience. So again, we're talking about something that's really through the senses, through the body, feeling, seeing, hearing, etc., and allowing the sensation of kind of your soulful essence to come through underneath the shell of the ego. So unrecognized prophecy, Derech Hashem talks about. Note that it is possible that a revelation come from him, God, may he be blessed, and that one not recognize it as a prophet would recognize it, but rather think of it as coming from a perceivable source until the prophetic influence later overpowers him and he recognizes the matter for what it truly was. So they give the example of the vision of the bush to Moses at the beginning was only revealed as something perceivable. So he saw the burning bush and the bush burning in flames, and the Holy One, blessed be he, called him with the source of his father. But afterwards, he brought the influence upon Moses and he grasped the truth of the prophecy. So again, that's really talking about something that Moses saw through the sensation of sight and then putting it together as a prophetic message from God. So taking this so I just wanted to establish like kind of what this feeling of, again, like when we're able to sort of shed the ego, feel into our senses, that's when we have an opportunity for more kind of divine alignment with the soul and with, universe. So taking this to Nissan and Pesach and all of everything we're discussing here for the month, it's said that when the Red Sea split, even a simple person, a maidservant, had greater prophecy than the prophet Ezekiel, right? It says, what a maidservant saw in the sea, the prophet Ezekiel did not see in his own divine visions. So the parting of the sea was sort of like a manifestation of divine action. And it was said that it was a more clear revelation than even what some of the prophets experienced. Now the question becomes, if all of the, if as the Jewish people were going through this moment of liberation, and they were able to really see this act of God in the splitting of the sea, why don't we have this kind of consciousness all the time, right? Like, why are we not always in touch with Hashem or seeing his will and his actions the way that when the sea was split? So it's in a book that I read, it's a very fun little book called Rabbi Nachman Says, the answer is we don't see this all the time because of fear. We don't have that kind of like prophetic state of mind because we're living in a state of fear. So as it's said, if I'm absolutely free inside and I'm not afraid of anything, if you're absolutely free inside, then you're not afraid of anything. Rabbi Nachman says that you can't taste the hidden light of the world unless you first get rid of fear, because fear paralyzes us mentally and physically. At the Red Sea, we learned not to be afraid, to trust God in the deepest way. And so, again, I've read different things about this experience at the Red Sea, and one of them that what really stuck with me is that it's not that the sea split and you just got to walk on through. It was actually like it was splitting as the Jews were walking through it. Like people were up to their necks in water and had to like break through fear and had to maintain sort of the faith, emunah, that God was still with them and going to continue to split the sea for them. So as Rabbi Nachman says in his, one of his most famous works, Likutei Moharan, anyone who wants to experience a taste of the Or HaGanuz, hidden light, i.e. the mysteries of the Torah that will be revealed in the future, must elevate the aspect of fear to its source. Now he says a lot of really trippy things like elevating fear to its source. Like what does that mean? Source in general, I perceive source to just mean God, right? Like God is source. That's how a lot of people talk about it. So as I was reading Likutei Moharan, it says my interpretation is that to elevate fear to its source means to cast away all judgments except those from God. Because the rest of the judgments that we have are really coming from within ourselves, and it's the ego judging ourselves. So the way that we, move through the world, and the ego makes judgments based really like at its core, just distinguishing like me from you, from every, all these types of trips that the ego lays on us, and the way we perceive ourselves. So the idea is that can we like move past the judgments of the ego, and then what's left is just fear of God. And that means like when we move past the ego itself, we're more in touch again with the neshama, with the soul, and the soul being a sort of our own piece of like divine inspiration and our own sort of like piece of that collective whole. That's really what we're trying to get to. And so like we do that through breaking through fear and feeling like the manifestation of God. And again, the Red Sea is kind of like the splitting of the sea is kind of a physical representation metaphor of that. So I wrote here in my notes, so much of the psychedelic experience is about working past fear. Even taking a substance itself can sometimes feel like a leap of faith. Fear so often, in my experience, is a product of the ego, fear of change, fear of losing control. But when we can release the ego, we are in greater alignment with the divine will and presence. And so much of the psychedelic experience, at least according to my experience, is about quieting the ego and becoming more in touch with the neshama. Albert Hoffman, who's the chemist who first synthesized LSD, called it medicine for the soul. And if in psychedelic science today, scientists are also defining the quote unquote mystical experience, and they're referring to a sense of oneness and transformation of our regular sense of self in a shift away from personal bias toward kind of collective consciousness. So I'm not going to go over the entire like mystical experience criteria, but you have it on the sheet here as you know, your loss of usual identity, breaking through the ego, you know, experience of oneness with the world around you, sense of oceanic boundlessness is what they like to say. So what I'll end on is that if this is, you know, this is what the medicine of the psychedelic journey is really about: breaking through ego, breaking through fear toward greater alignment of self, soul, and source, at the end of which can sort of feel like a rebirth, a cleansing, a realignment, a newfound sensation of freedom. And that's how I relate that to Nissan. So that is Nissan to me, getting through this kind of ecstatic psychedelic experience that we just had in the holiday month of Adar, where we had Purim, which is just a psychedelic holiday in my experience. And I guess maybe in a year from now, we'll go over why Purim is so psychedelic. But, you know, it's this, you know, everything, like Purim is just ecstatic. It's everything. The whole essence is, I don't know, Adalo Yoda. Now we're like moving through all of that, and dust is settling, and we're in Nissan, we're new, we're fresh. And so we're in this state, like plants that are finally sprouting from the ground again. And that's like this manifestation of the way nature works, right? Like, and you see that the same way that we saw the splitting of the sea, the way you see a plant popping up from the ground is just like, to me, God manifest. So too, a psychedelic experience can be brutal and scary at times, like crossing the sea, which itself sounded like a psychedelic journey, forcing the Jewish people to release fear and release the ego, but at the end of which is when you find freedom. So that's where the real work begins, not just in getting free, but once we are free, what do we actually do with it? That's the work of psychedelic integration. How can we maintain the faith and manifest vision of God as we walk the path of our mundane lives? So Nissan is our spiritual rebirth. I see it as sort of a baby being born, free in the world outside the womb. And the question becomes, what now? And what do you do with this thing called life? And so much of it for me really boils down to breaking out of fear. And once we're out of fear, we're in freedom. So I was thinking of even like the process of being born, which, you know, is that scary for a baby? Or does a baby not even have enough ego or sense of like attachment to anything to have fear as a sensation? I'm not sure. And it's a question, I guess, for scientists. But really what I see Nissan is like being a fresh baby, kind of pure in our essence before the ego even develops. And so that's where I want to kind of leave this. And Penny, if you have questions and poke holes in all my arguments, go for it.
I'd love to, but I think I'm going to poke holes in both of our arguments after my bit, because I think it just segues straight into my portion. So let me just share the screen on that one. 1 second. There we go. So I love the way that you ended with that what is Nissan, and I think that it's very similar to where I've found myself thinking about. I wanted to start by just quoting a pasuk that we also say, a passage that we also say during the prayer and the holidays, and the pasuk is Mina metzar karatiya anani b'merchavya. From the narrow place I call out to God, and His answer in expanse, b'merchavya, in expansion. And Mitzrayim, which is Egypt in Hebrew, is also translated as the narrow place. And basically the entire, I'm gonna use the metaphor of the entire celebration of Passover and celebration of Nisan is coming out of the narrow into the expansive state. And I think for anyone who's been through a psychedelic experience, expansion is something which is quite familiar, maybe very weird, but still something that we can appreciate. Another sentence that I found from the Baal Shem Tov that I think is also related, and the Baal Shem Tov was like this, the first Ashkenazi, mystical guru, I think that we can say that really, this sentence from him says, through laughter, we go from a small world to a big world. We expand from stressed time to free time, and from a narrow spirit to an expanded one. And I think that laughter here, I'm gonna be using laughter as an expression of joy. So basically, what I'm saying here is that for me, Nisan is using joy to go from the narrow place of despair into a more expansive place. And this sums up the psychedelic theme of Nisan for me. Mitzrayim, the narrow place, or the mind, which is unsatisfied and is busy in survival mode and doesn't see any other options, and how joy can help that be expanded. And Mitzrayim is also, Egypt is also the prototype model for exile, for Galut. The departure from this exile is also the prototype for all the redemptions to come. It says that Benisan Igalu, in Nisan they were redeemed, and in Nisan they shall be redeemed again. And what that means is that there's a lot of lessons to be learned about how being redeemed from the first Galut, from the first exile, will shape the next redemptions. And for this bit, I wanted to quote another Hasidic Rebbe that I have a lot of respect for, the Slonim Rebbe, the Netivot Shalom. And he says at the end of the Babylon exile, from the darkness within a darkness, such as before the dawn, when it's the most dark, as in the first redemption from Egypt, and he's saying also the second redemption will be similar, at the end of the Galut, from a deep physical and spiritual darkness. This is similar to a woman giving birth. Those final contractions where we can already see the beginning of the light at the end of the tunnel, preceding the appearance of new life, strike her with such pain and danger. But from that, there will become a new light. So the expansion that we're talking about is actually some kind of rebirth or birth. We're going through the contractions, we're going through the parts that seem to be defining us in a very, very narrow way, but we can see how they become more and more expanded. This place of challenge blossoms into the light, into the redemption. And I think this is very similar to the way that difficult trips can become life-changing experiences. You just have to keep breathing and keep pushing, and it's very similar to birth, so I've heard. But in the end, the light will shine through. And this is a theme that I've seen with many people's experience and integration, and I think we can all connect to that. But then the question that comes up is, why can't we be redeemed in this dark place? Why do we have to go through that tunnel of contractions? Why can't we have that instant redemption out of where we're stuck? And this is where I'm going to use another translation of the word tsar in Hebrew, which means narrow, which also means sad. Tsarli means I'm sad, I'm sorry for something sad that happened. And regarding this sadness, Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, that we mentioned that his birthday is celebrated today on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, he says the following: Veda, know that the dark mood, the marash chora, or the despair, it is impossible to lead the mind inside of it as you will. Meaning the despair or the difficulty, when we perceive it as such, enslaves us in a way and captures us in a way that we can't lead our mind as we will. And therefore, it is difficult to settle your mind, to find that settled space. Only through joy, you will be able to lead your mind as willed and to settle it and to bring it to that settled place. Because joy is the world of freedom. As said, for in joy you shall go out, besimcha tetzeu. That by joy we can become free and are redeemed from exile. And that is why when one connects joy to the mind, then his thought and his mind shall be in freedom. And this is also in Likutei Moharan. So being happy and experiencing joy is crucial to liberation. But we become sad again and feel the narrow places coming up. Right? It's just like those contractions, they keep coming. Things keep messing up and they cause us to be sad again and to forget that joy, and forget that freedom. And in a similar way, the Maharal, another great mystic from Maharal Miprag, says that the rule of nations over Jews, meaning the exile, it can return again and again, even though we've been redeemed. And he says a warning to those who ask or think, what good did the exodus from Egypt do for us? For we are still subject to the rule of other kingdoms. What is different? The kingdom of Egypt was just one of many exiles. So why are we celebrating Passover? Why are we celebrating this amazing redemption if we're just, exile after exile, we come back to this contracted state? And he said, however, these are foolish words, because when the children of Israel left Egypt, that first redemption, they received the goodness in itself until they were worthy of being free on their own. The process that the people of Israel went through in Yetziat Mitzrayim, in exiting the first original narrow place, left them with an inherent goodness, with an inherent freedom that is inside of them. And occasional things, that's what he says, and he says the rule of kingdoms, for example, is some things that happen on occasion, cannot cancel out an essential, an inherent part. So if there is the merit of us being worthy of freedom that we've gained in that first liberation, the exiles to come and the kingdoms that will rule us in the future cannot erase that place, because Israel is still at this elevated state of being inherently free with the passing subjugation of nations. So nations will come and go, and the inherent freedom that we've gained as a people, coming out of that narrow place, that freedom is still alive in us. And in a similar way, we can see that joy is a state that is in us. It's always available. This is something I learned from one of Ramdas's lectures. It's something we can tap into. It's not something that we get and lose. It's a state of being. And similar to the freedom, it's inherent in us from our original redemption, from the first time that we came out of the narrow place into the light. And once our mind has that expansive quality of freedom and joy, there's no turning back from it, no matter who or what may be ruling the external passing state that we're under. And I want to finish with one last bit from Rav Kook, which is quite a modern rabbi who was known as part of the modern Zionistic movement. And he takes this from a personal level to another, maybe national or group or community level. He says the difference between a slave and a free person is not only a social strata difference. Okay, we can find educated slaves whose spirit is full of freedom, and the opposite, we can find free person whose spirit is that of a slave. Freedom is the same uplifting spirit that the individual and the nation are arisen up by, to be faithful of their inner self. So freedom is the thing that lifts our nefesh, our internal spirit, to a place that we've rised above the difficulty and rised above the questions, to a place of being faithful to our inner self. With such a characteristic, one can feel their life as purposeful and that their worth is equal. This is not the case for the spirit of slavery, whose significance to one's life and their feelings never shines through, except in what is good and beautiful in the eyes of the master, holding control over them, whether official or moral control. So in slavery, we see that what is nice or what is good or what is happy is what is good and happy in the eyes of the master, and not in the eyes of the person being enslaved. And this is the main difference between the slave and the free person, is understanding the worth is equal, and understanding that we can feel our life as purpose by following and being faithful to our inner self. Whether this is official or moral control in what the other finds to be good and beautiful. So Rav Kook is also saying freedom has to do with loyalty to our inner self and connection to our inner self. And that's another thing that I think in the context of psychedelic experience, this is a very, very important idea. Experience of psychedelics can be challenging, they can be frightening, they can be despairing in some ways, and they often require us to confront our fears and face our inner demons. However, by doing so in a healthy mindset, which recognizes that we are worth and that we have that place of joy available to us, we're able to achieve a greater sense of liberation and joy and freedom, both from the constraints of our own mind and from the traumatic limitations and constructs of the physical world around us. And as we celebrate the month of Nisan and we reflect on these themes of liberation and redemption, I think we can draw strength from this idea that the true freedom comes from within. And this is such a cliche, but cliches, they became cliches because how many times they were right over and over and over again. And connecting that true freedom with joy, which is such an expansive state, I think that this is what Nisan can really teach us about our psychedelic states, and also about our integration processes from these. So coming out of a difficult psychedelic state, joy can be very liberating, can be very connecting, and remaining faithful to our inner self can be very connecting as well. And I'd like to finish with a blessing that may all beings in all the worlds be happy and free. And I think that's kind of another Hindu Jewish crossover here, but I think this is a blessing that is very Nisan for me in a way.
Thank you. And that sounds like a Ram Dass, the all beings be happy and free. I think I've seen that a lot.
I think it's about 2,500 years more ancient than that.
Right.
But
I see it on like the
common.
bumper stickers with the Ram Dass crew. So
yeah, it's a very Lokasa Masta Sukina Bhavantu. It's a very old mantra, but I think that these themes of liberation and joy, are happy and free, they're cliche, but they're something that when we know to wish for them, they can help us through very, very difficult situations, whether in mind-altering substance use, or in politics, or in how to treat our parents, or in all kinds of different places where we feel those contractions, those places of being narrowed down by our mind and by the world.
one thing that neither one of us touched on, but is sort of like a foundational thing here, I think, has to do with breath. And they were saying that when the Jews were being liberated from Egypt, any lack of faith was seen as a lack of. The way I also interpret it is like when I've got, if you're in a psychedelic experience and hitting like a challenging moment, like the first thing to do is to return to your breath and to breathe. And you want to go from like this place of contracted, like shortness of breath, to like expanded breathing, right? And so like through, that even like most basic level of expansion and contraction to the breath, we're able to both like like work through points of fear, which I talked about, get to points of expansion, and ultimately when we're in at that point of expansion and being easy and whatever, we have access to our joy, which also is kind of what Penny was referring to in his. And so seems like really and another thing with breath is that in Hebrew, the word for neshama, soul, and neshima, breath, is the same. Like when we're in this state of
they're not the same. There's the letter Yud in the middle, which is putting God in the middle. So
yeah, exactly.
Neshima is basically soul with God in the center of it.
Exactly. So the same related. Sorry, in Latin it's actually the same. It's a spiritus. But pretty much like I feel like that's like where we're getting at, is like how are we like getting in touch with the soul as the root of our our joy, our lack of fear, our place of actual freedom and liberation, and like what is, that's I think, the way I interpret almost every psychedelic experience and Jewish experience is, how is this touching on the soul?
Yeah, I made a joke this week that there's a common denominator for me between going through a psychedelic experience and going into a synagogue, which is I start by holding my breath, and then I need to remind myself to keep breathing.
Yeah.
That's just my ex-religious PTSD. But I think breath here is also, for me, it's also very much connected to springtime. There's this feeling of, after the winter, we can go outside and take this deep breath of the fresh spring air, see the flowers breathing around us, and see the ground starting to prepare itself for summer. And this is something that you said in your introduction about Nissan being one of those four New Years in the Jewish year. And it's also, there's a big debate in the Talmud if Nisan is the time that the world was created or Rosh Hashanah. So there's kind of, well, some of the opinions might say that this is actually the first part of creation, that spring is where the world was created and not the beginning of winter. And I think that breath in the Jewish creation story is integral to that. I mean, God blows his breath into the human body in order to animate it. The breath of all creation will praise the Lord, this nishmat kol chai. There's different connections between breath and between creation. And the other opinion in the Talmud that is not saying that the world was created in Nisan, but rather in Tishrei, is still very much recognizing the fact that this is the time for recreation. And recreation is another psychedelic word, because we use that as a derogatory term for any use that isn't in ceremony, but recreational use is actually rebreathing, right? Breathing again into the same places and bringing out what was created in a new way. So that's a celebratory time for me. I think Nissan is reminding me that recreational use is just as creative and important, and maybe in a new way is very different from the original, very serious kind of creation. Maybe, like you said, after Purim, we can approach this kind of holy work with more joy, with more laughter.
Yeah, I think, first of all, like recreational use can feel therapeutic, right? Like when we're having fun, we can breathe easy. And I think that's also like Nissan to me is like this massive sigh of relief, like we made it through winter. I think with regard also to the questions about like, when does the world start? When does life start? It's similar, not to bring it back into anything controversial, but like, does life start when you're born and like free in the world? Or does life start when you're just a little seedling and you're like still like in the womb or like underneath the earth, And so there are these different phases, not even a clear definition of like when we're really starting and recreating or being birthed versus being created. It's all kind of these different levels of life. And so if you think of, I've heard, women who have children have said like giving birth is like a psychedelic experience. And here we have, it's like this big bang of an experience. And then you have something that's like in the world, a baby. And so it's like, again, with Adar, this like ecstatic kind of like explosive thing, it's almost like a psychedelic experience. And now we're like, oh, a sigh of relief, like we're here, we're born. Now what,
I think that it's so amazing to me that Rabbi Nachman's birthday can be on the exact day in between Purim and the Seder, between the ecstatic celebration of getting drunk and doing all these ecstatic. Purim is a day where we're kind of commanded to celebrate and go crazy, and then Leila Seder, or the first evening of Passover, is this culmination of this cleaning process, and it's very, very anal. We got to do this, and then there's a ritual of how you do that. And I think that right in between those 2 points in time, there's this birthday, which is so amazing to me. And also that's the day that we're actually on right now. So we're kind of in between that place of of, I almost want to say din and chesed, the mystical Kabbalistic sides of boundaries on the one hand, and infinite grace on the other hand. So it's just such a privilege to share this kind of day and time with all of you. And I think this would be a good time to open the floor for any of you to share insights that you've found today, or something from the breakout groups that you'd like to share with us. So please, let's try and make this more of a conversation.
You can unmute yourself and just say something if anyone wants to.
Mhm.
Hey, it's Gabe Sachs. In our breakout group, we were talking about the tension and maybe between how psychedelics is more of a universal experience and integrates with you with the entire world, and Judaism has a particular aspect to it of like our people, our history, our specific ethnicity even, and trying to, I think what we came up with was something along the lines of, you use Judaism as a vehicle to connect with the general, and it's sort of our specific way to plug in. But I'm curious what you guys think about that, how it relates to this rebirth that we're talking about.
I think I'll pop in with this one just because I want to hear what Madison has to say, and I have something in my stomach. But I think that for me, this particularity that you're raising the question around is something that has bothered me immensely growing up as an Orthodox Jew. And I think that through psychedelic experiences in my life, I've learned to see how what I learned of as being very typically Jewish is something that I can see in so many people who are definitely not Jewish, and so many traditions that are, some of them very, very far away. I still think that if we take away the perspective from being just, about a specific descendants or a specific group of people, I think that the perspective we're talking about is about God, and is about mystical experiences, and is about ritual and practice. And I'm very welcoming to anyone from whatever descent to contribute and partake in this kind of practice. I think it's very similar for me to the way that, some medicines have spread around the world, and they come from very typical places with very typical traditions. And not to say that we should be stealing them or copying them in very specific ways, but I think that there is room around the fire for everyone. And I wish that more and more of Judaism would be able to collaborate around that in a way.
It's what psychedelic scientists, for instance, have been able to qualify this mystical experience through criteria that so many people are checking off. It kind of shows that there is some universality to mysticism. And I also wrote about this in Heaven and Hell, which is the adjoining essay to Perception, where he just made the observation that you see in glittering temples around the world all have these psychedelic, geometric, shiny, glittering patterns, right? And so in any place that's devoted to higher power, you're kind of seeing similar motifs. And so it's kind of this fractalization, that the way I see it is a fractalization of the same thing, where the fractals are the individual pieces, but of actually a shared collective whole. And I think the psychedelic experience taps into that. And Judaism also is kind of an opportunity. I mean, again, we have a collective narrative, and then you see the way that Judaism has been fractalized through all the different ways of practicing it. So that's I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think about it, Gabriel?
Yeah, I definitely hear that the universality of the psychedelic experience. I find it interesting that in Judaism we're finding this parallel. Both of you were bringing up ways in which it really fits very well together with psychedelic experiences that other people generally have. And I just find it interesting that yet we're talking about something that's in a sense almost tribal, you know, like we came out and we have this. So it's just very interesting how, you know, I mean, really the Torah is meant for the whole world. It's for the Jewish people to share with the whole world. So in a sense, maybe it could be seen as this is for everyone to see, and it's just a this is in a way one specific example is what's taught for Jews. I'm not sure if I'm coming out clear on, but
No, I think you're reminding me of the reason why I was so adamant to talk about Mitzrayim not as a place, as Egypt, not as a place, but as a state of mind. And I think I'm very much not original about it. There's hundreds of years of tradition, perspectives, saying that, you know, coming out of Egypt is not coming out of Egypt. It's coming out of the narrow place in our mind. It's coming out of the place that we are in survival mode. And I think that it's almost impossible for ancient times to expect of people to come out of survival mode. But here we are today, experiencing these psychedelic experiences, experiencing, you know, the bliss and the bounty of being in, you know, 2023 all over the world, talking to each other. And for me, this is coming out of Egypt. And you can see, I mean, Pesach is the most busiest week in Sinai in Egypt. I mean, this the week with the most Israelis going down to have vacation, literally where the sea was split. So, I mean, some people don't like that, but for me, that's kind of a wondrous miracle that we get to be in a place where we're not haunted by being Jews. We can celebrate Jewish tradition together with the rest of the world, like you said, in a way that we're being more expansive about it and less narrow.
Yeah.
So can I just ask then, connected to this, so would you say then that the psychedelic experience, that is universal, but what we're dealing with right now here is the interpretation of it, and this is when the Jewish particularity comes in?
I think part of it is interpretation and part of it is practice. That's, I mean, there's different ways to look at it for sure.
I think David, you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi, David. I actually wanted to talk about animal spirits, which is something that comes up a lot in the psychedelic ceremonial space, but is kind of officially frowned upon in Judaism as a form of, you know, animism or primitive pagan religion. But I see specifically in many stories in the Torah, but specifically in the Pesach story, several examples of animal spirits as kind of channels of a divine message right there in the text. And I would just share maybe a few examples that I've seen. One being the snakes, which are, you know, the staff of Moses and Aaron. And there's a whole interplay between those snakes and the snakes of the Egyptians. But essentially, those snakes are messengers of messages of God. I'm sorry?
I think there was just background noise.
Go ahead, David.
Okay. And another one in particular that has spoken to me recently, which actually came to me after several experiences with Bufo, with the psychedelic. Because actually psychedelics, and you know, I think when I think about animal spirits, it's about getting in touch with a more primitive form of our spirit that's like embedded in our ancient DNA, without all of this human stuff that oftentimes gets in the way of our soul. And in the Bufo, what I felt, and here I'm sharing a personal experience, is actually that I became a frog. I actually connected with the DNA of frog. And then I thought about it, what is a frog? And a frog is actually an amphibious being which is able to move back and forth at will between the oceanic source of all of life, but also the limited possibilities of land, which represents progress, technology, and light. And then I looked in the story of the plagues, because we have a lot of frogs there. But it's very interesting that it talks about the frogs in plural, but several commentators, Jewish commentators, have noted that there's one sentence specifically which talks about the frog in singular, Vata'al hatzfardea mimei Mitzrayim. So, Penny, I was really thinking about what you said, Mitzrayim being the narrow place, and the frog actually being a vehicle for rising up from that murky, narrow place where everything is kind of blurry and we don't really see. It's a kind of expansion into the light, but then being able to actually go back to that oceanic source and can reconnect with our fish-like essence, which is really what
I love that. I love that, David. Thank you so much for sharing this. I just want to say that that's Fardea, the frog. In some of the commentators is also the source of all of the other frogs that come out of it and plague Egypt.
It's the mother, the mother frog.
I mean, it's kind of a resemblance also for the way that unity can split up and be reunited into one. And I just wanted to say that there is a very ancient traditional Jewish perspectives of looking at animals in very humble ways and learning from them. We can see in the 12 tribes the way that Yaakov blesses his sons. I mean, there's a snake there, there's a lion there, there's a donkey there, there's at least, I think, 6 or 7 different animals, which each of the tribes of Israel are resembled. Well, not all of them are animals, but at least in some way by learning a lesson from something in the natural world. So I think that there's definitely a lot of unearthed traditions that still need to be looked at regarding animal spirit versus animal lessons in Judaism. For me, that is very interesting. And thank you for raising that.
You also see it, I mean, a few things here, just relating to constriction and expansion. The gematria for snake is the same gematria for Mashiach. So you have this sort of relationship between like this evil, like, constriction, whatever, and like, Mashiach, like Messiah, right? So it's kind of two sides of the same, I don't want to say the same coin, but it's a relationship there. And then just for your own like kind of continued reading, I highly recommend the book Magic of the Ordinary by Gershon Winkler. It's about the shamanic roots of Judaism. And Judaism has a really, not Judaism, I'll say, but like the religion of the tribe before we were even officially Jews. It's like a really strong tradition of relating to animals. And you even see that in some of like the more traditional Jewish names out there. I was actually just having a conversation with Penny about like Rachel, like my Hebrew name means you, right? EWE, like a little animal, and Zev, wolf, like all different names actually are relating to animal spirits in a lot of ways. So, we think it's like this taboo thing, like animism, avodah zarah, whatever, that seems like foreign, and a lot of people are afraid of it, coming from traditional Jewish backgrounds, but it's like, so it's like this almost like hidden but revealed or type of thing within, it's just so, it's so blatant, it's hidden in some ways.
Can you write the name of that book in the chat?
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat, definitely.
We have a few more minutes, so if anyone else wants to comment or share something, please.
Just continuing also, one thing, David, is that Torah that I shared from Rabbi Nachman Likutei Moharan number 15, if you read the whole Torah, there's a whole section where he's talking about frogs, serpents, and ravens, and how he said he saw this, and it's about fear. And so basically, I really encourage you to just, I can link in Safaria, but I encourage you to read it because he talks about how he saw this as a frog that was as big as a city, and a serpent came along and swallowed it, and a raven came along and swallowed the serpent. And it's kind of this cycle of how the animals are relating to each other. So it's so interesting that you're asking about specifically frogs, because I was just reading about a frog. And
There's also a story about Baal Shem Tov that he actually had a vision of a frog in the wilderness and communicated with it.
I'd be
There's a
curious.
book waiting to be written here, David.
It's already been written, yeah. So
I was actually going to ask Judah, as we were winding down, was sharing a couple passages from the Gemara. One is to kind of blessings being ensconced relative to moments of revelation. I'm not sure if Judah still tuned in. I was curious about, he was, sharing about how, there was revelation in the passage through his sea, and everybody could see clearly, and then it led to the calf right after, and there was too much revelation. So I was hoping he could complete that and maybe share with the group.
I've just been meditating a lot recently, and the Gemara says "Ein bracha shora ela b'davar hasamoy min hayin," which means that like blessing doesn't spread. Blessing only spreads on something which is hidden, and there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah and a Gemara in Chagiga, which may be too long for now, but which make the point clear that there, like, in order for sacredness to be held correctly, there's like an element of the veil, like trickery, which has to be there, which has to cover it. And I'm trying to remember what the Medrash is, but the Medrash talks about the golden calf, and references what Madison was talking about before, that the Jews when they were crossing the sea had visions that were greater than any of the later prophets saw. And there's a discussion in Medrash between God and the angels right when the golden calf happens, and God is like, oh, I might have overdone this a little bit. I might have made things too clear for the people. And that like intensity of clarity may be framed as with poor integration, or with the need to maintain a certain kind of awareness that they didn't have the tools for, maybe kind of led to downfall, where they had this need to stay on this high point without correctly integrating it. That's what I was thinking.
Thank you so much. I appreciated that insight. And I also felt like a blessing for the ensconced, or like a patience around that which is not yet clear. So that's what I'm taking away from it.
I think the intensity of the clarity is like, we have actually like that actually protects us from it. It's like, if we were walking around in like this like full psychedelic light all the time, we'd lose our minds. I mean, there are these Torah stories of people who have lost their minds, right? Because they couldn't handle it, like brushing fire. Like that's really what, too much light, too much clarity of light can do you, God forbid. So, just again, it goes back to like, we have this expansion of light, and then we need to contract a little bit just for our own like basic survival in like the lower world. Like, we're not always in like this Atzilut type of high Kabbalistic place. So
I think the most obvious to me would be that after the group miracle, which is a giant, crazy, amazing vision of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai, the thing that happens after that is 40 days of waiting and then getting a bunch of rules. Okay, there's no more clear point at integration that I can imagine. So you have a group of people that just go through a psychedelic vision together, and then they have to patiently wait for a month. And that, I mean, for me, I don't know, David brought up Bufo. First time I did 5-MeO, it took me about 2 months to even realize what happened and start setting down some rules for what I can actually do with that experience. So, I mean, I see here a great wisdom in the way that these stories have the hidden side to them. But like we said before about joy and liberation, once you're free, you can see these things, and you can see what they are trying to tell you in a way that maybe other people don't really get. Sfirat HaOmer, which is another example of maybe preparation more than integration. There's 49 days leading up to the receiving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, and before we had the other reasons, and maybe we'll talk about that in Iyar next month, and I hope that you'll all join us. But there's a big place of preparing as a group, and also preparing as a single unit, as a person, in preparation of such great light coming down, and building those vessels in order for us to use those lights coming down in a way that is useful for the group and for the world. So that's just I guess also a peek into next month. I just want to use our last 2 minutes here together and really thank you all for joining us. This was a very successful experiment that me and Medicine have run, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you join. We're going to be doing this every new Hebrew month, so every Rosh Chodesh, and I'll be sending out emails to those of you who wished so. I'll just use my last minute here to say thank you to Medicine for helping me make this dream come true, because I've peddled this idea here and there, and I think that I couldn't have asked for a better partner for this situation. So thank you, Medicine.
Penny, you cut out. What did you say?
I said that I couldn't ask for a better partner for this chavrusa. I've peddled this idea around, and I think that it was worth waiting. I'm so happy about it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you everyone for joining. It's nice to see some new faces, and definitely spread the word. I think you all got the email from us, so if you have any questions there, you can just go ahead and ask us right there. And if you want to just stay tuned with what we're doing, follow along Penny for.
Yeah, and we hope to see you all next month and the month after. Saying I'm hoping to see you all next month, and if not, the month after. And 11 months from now, we'll have a real cool discussion about Purim, hopefully. But before then, we also have maybe the Jewish Psychedelic Summit coming up in June, and some other events where I'm sure some of this conversation will continue. So it was a real pleasure. Hope to see you all again.
Thanks, everyone.